I am Elizabeth Polgreen, and I'm really not sure if this is the right audience for this, but I have a confession to make. I really don't trust computers. I don't trust the computers in my bank. I don't trust the computers in my car. I don't trust the ones I use in my job. And I also don't trust the ones in my healthcare. And this is all starting to sound a little bit tinfoil hat. So let me tell you some stories to justify this. This blurry photo is Therac 25. It was a machine that delivered radiation therapy to cancer patients in the 1980s. Due to a software bug called a race condition, where two threads of software race to access the same bit of memory at the same time, this machine delivered over 100 times the dose it was supposed to some of the patients. 3 people died. And if we fast forward to the 1990s, this is the Ariane 5 rocket launch. It is widely considered to be one of the most expensive software failures ever. So there was a variable that stored information about the orientation of the rocket, and this was stored in a data type that was too small for it. So we got what's called an integer overflow, where the number got too big for the data type, it overflowed, the software crashed, the rocket veered drastically off course, and it exploded. That was pretty expensive. And so some of you weren't even born in the 90s, so you're probably thinking, oh, but this is all ancient history, isn't it? Well, okay, so I hope you've been looking at the news recently. You've probably seen the Horizon Post Office scandal. I'm not going to pretend I know what the bug is here because I don't think that's public. But the upshot is the accounting software issued by the Post Office widely reported completely incorrect totals. Postmasters were falsely accused of stealing from the Post Office and falsely imprisoned. This absolutely devastated lives. And this is just a small sample of the software disasters I could have told you about. I could have told you about how Delta Airlines software bug grounded all of their planes worldwide. I could have told you about the Lime Scooters software bug that means as you're riding, it will just randomly decide to brake and throw you off onto the floor. And who knows what the next news story is going to be that we're all going to see. So the question is, why are we so bad at computers? Well, firstly, software is getting really, really big. It's getting really difficult for humans to reason about systems this big, even if they were the ones that wrote it. And this problem is getting much, much worse. Because now, we're letting AI write its own code. And this article boldly claims that's a good thing. I really don't think it is. The robots look cute, but they are demonstrated to introduce security vulnerabilities, and they are reliant on software engineers checking their output. And we've already shown that humans are bad at that. We couldn't get this right when we were manually programming 8-bit microcontrollers. How do we expect to get this right now? What I'm saying is join me as leader of the Luddites. Let's smash up all of the computers. Let's get rid of the tech companies. Let's live a life that is free of technology, and it'll be glorious. But I didn't tell you what my job is. So I'm a lecturer in computer science for the University of Edinburgh. I also have a research fellowship from the Royal Academy of Engineering. And none of this is very compatible with being leader of the Luddites. So instead, I'm going to tell you about how Sherlock Holmes has helped me work through some of my software trust issues. Why Sherlock? He's tall, he's good looking, he's got dubious standards of hygiene, but most importantly, he has impeccable logical reasoning skills. When Sherlock first met Watson in the BBC TV series, Sherlock invites Watson to share a flat with him. And Watson says, but we don't know anything about each other. And Sherlock says, I know that you're an army doctor who's been invalided home from Afghanistan. I know that you've got a brother who cares about you, but you won't go to him for help because you don't approve of him, possibly because he's an alcoholic, more likely because he's just walked out on his wife. And I think that's enough to be going on with, don't you? And so Watson is surprised. How did Sherlock know this? Nobody told him. And later on, he asks Sherlock, and Sherlock says, "I didn't know, I saw. Your haircut and the way you hold yourself says military." And he goes on and he says, "Well, the conversation as you entered the room said trained at Barts, so you must be a doctor." And he goes on and explains how he knew everything about Watson. But what he doesn't say is the fundamental mechanism behind his reasoning. Sherlock uses two types of reasoning. He uses proof-theoretic reasoning and model-theoretic reasoning. So, proof-theoretic reasoning, this is a lot less complicated than it sounds. Proof-theoretic reasoning is when we take facts and we use deduction to infer new bits of information. Model-theoretic reasoning is when we consider all of the possible solutions, which we call models, and we go through them one by one and see which one is correct. So an example of proof-theoretic reasoning: Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal, R.I.P. Socrates. Watson, you trained at Barts. I know that Barts is a medical school, therefore Watson, you are a doctor. And there are examples of this kind of proof-theoretic reasoning throughout the books and the TV series. But what about model-theoretic reasoning? Okay, so remember what Sherlock said second. He said, "I know that you've got a brother who is worried about you, but you won't go to him for help." How did Sherlock know that Watson had a brother? Sherlock has seen Watson's phone. On the back of Watson's phone, it says, "Harry, from Clara, kiss, kiss, kiss." And Sherlock uses model-theoretic reasoning to figure out who Harry might be. He says, what if Harry is Watson? Well, this phone is a very fancy phone. It's the latest model, and it's covered in scratches. This phone is really far too fancy for a man who is looking for a flat share. If this was Watson's, he would have definitely looked after it better, because it would have been his most valuable possession. Okay, it's not Watson. Perhaps it's his father. No, it's the latest model. It's not a young man's gadget. Perhaps it's another relative. Perhaps it's his cousin. Except that Watson is a war hero who has nowhere to live. It seems pretty unlikely he has close extended relatives, certainly not close enough to be giving him expensive gadgets. So we're left with one answer. Harry is Watson's brother. But what's all this reasoning got to do with software? Let me introduce you to a SAT solver. A SAT solver takes in a set of statements and it tells you if they can be true or if they are always false. So A or B can be true because we can set A to be true or B to be true, and then the whole statement is true. A and not A can never be true. This is always false because if A is true, not A is false, and so on. I often tell students they can think of SAT solvers as magic black boxes that give you the right answers. I'm going to tell you something different. You can think of a SAT solver as your own personal Sherlock Holmes. Because what SAT solvers do is they take your set of true statements, they use a combination of proof-theoretic and model-theoretic reasoning, and then they give you the answer. So let's look at an example. Suppose we live in a world where everyone is a truth teller or a liar. Truth tellers only tell the truth, liars only tell lies. And we meet two people, and A says, we're both liars. And we want to know, could B be a truth teller? We give that to our own personal Sherlock Holmes in this set of statements. And our own personal Sherlock Holmes starts off by applying some reasoning. So we start off by saying, let's pick a model. Let's do some model theoretic reasoning. Pick a model. Suppose that A is a truth teller. If A is a truth teller, that means the statement, A and B are liars, is true. We can use proof theoretic reasoning to conclude that that means that A is a liar. If A is a liar, A cannot be a truth teller, and that's incompatible with the model we had, so that model was wrong. Pick a new model. A is a liar. That means the statement A and B are liars is false. For that statement to be false, either A or B must not be a liar, so B is not a liar, which means that the statement, is B a truth teller, is true. And still, what has this got to do with software? Well, I work in an area of research called automated verification. And what we do is we build tools that turn questions about your code into sets of statements that you can give to a SAT solver, and the SAT solver will tell you if those statements are true or if they are always false. So questions we might ask are, does this variable ever overflow? Remember Ariana 5? That would be a useful question to ask. We might want to ask, can anyone apart from me access this data? Are there any race conditions? Does my program ever crash? And we turn these questions into sets of statements that we give to our own personal Sherlock, and our personal Sherlock will tell us if they could be true. And if they could be true, we can go back and we can fix the problem, and then we can repeat the process. And these things are genuinely deployed in industry. It's been a while since you've seen one of these, right? It's definitely been a while since I've seen a blue screen of death, and it's not just because I use a Mac now. The reason you haven't seen one of these recently is because of these guys who worked at Microsoft. They built a tool called SLAM, and SLAM turns the question, does my code ever crash, into a set of logical statements that it gives to a SAT solver. And so the developers have fixed many of the crashes that previously led to blue screens of death. And you may have stored your own personal data on Amazon Web Services in S3 buckets. And if you haven't, I'm telling you now that you have used a company that has put your data on there. There are companies everywhere using this. If you've used Ryanair, if you've used Netflix, your data's gone on Amazon Web Services. And when you put your data in an S3 bucket, you have to write some lines of code that says who can access your bucket. And people are not very good at this. And there's been a number of data breaches in the past where buckets have accidentally been left as public because these lines of code have been written with a vulnerability in that means the bucket is public. Except this happens a lot less now because of work done by Neha Rungta and her team at Amazon Web Services. They've built a tool called Zelkova, which turns the question of, is my data accessible to the public, into a set of logical formula that are given to a solver. And if the solver says, yes, your data could be publicly accessible, it gives a little warning flag that says to you, the user, this is public. Did you mean to make it public? And you can go back and fix it. So, is that it? Is the problem solved now? Well, sadly not, or perhaps fortunately for me, or I wouldn't have a job. So, there are some big open challenges. First one is scale. A thing that a lot of researchers in the area are working on is pushing these tools to scale to our biggest software systems. Another problem is asking the right questions. How do we know the questions we are asking are fully specifying what we want our software to do? Another problem is assumptions. Harry isn't Watson's brother. Harry is Watson's sister. When Sherlock was doing his reasoning, he started off with the assumption that Harry is a man's name, and then he used proof-theoretic reasoning to rule out all of the models where Harry was a woman. We need to make assumptions when we verify our code. We need to make assumptions about the hardware it runs on and about the environment it interacts with. How do we know those are the right ones? And the final thing that we need is we need buy-in. We need the software developers of today and of the future, and hopefully that is some of you, to buy into the idea that you need to use verification on your software. You need to prove that your software does what you intended it to do when you are building the code that runs on our safety-critical systems everywhere in our lives. And so I started this talk by saying that I don't trust computers. Has Sherlock helped? Can I take off the tinfoil hat? Well, perhaps I can loosen it a little bit. Let me update this statement. I do trust computers, provided their desired behavior has been fully specified, and it's been mathematically proven that their actual behavior satisfies that specification under reasonable assumptions. Otherwise, I am cautious, and I think you should be too.